Hey folks, today I'll be continuing with another video in my Jayco Pinnacle series, and I'll be talking about one of Jayco's exclusive features that I believe is in just about all their towable RVs now, and that is their patented drinking water system, which combines this 5-gallon jug with a dedicated pump that feeds both a dispenser in the kitchen typically, along with, if you have an ice maker, the ice line going to your refrigerator. Now I think this is a great idea as it solves the problem of having poor drinking water while you're out camping, which, you know, at the very least it might taste different or be unappealing, and that's even if you've got a filter installed already. So instead of being forced to drink the water provided by your campsite's municipality, you can now bring your own drinking water, you know, whether from your home's reverse osmosis system or your favorite brand of bottled water. And you don't have to worry about changing water filters or losing water pressure in your coach due to a fancy 3-stage filtration system. So it's really a great idea and very unique, as I believe that Jayco is pretty much the only one in the RV industry doing this right now. But as great as the concept is, I do think it could be executed upon a little bit better, and so that's what today's video is going to focus on. Now, before I bought my Jayco Pinnacle, I spent a lot of time researching online, and one of the questions I had is, what do other owners think about the drinking water system? And I remember reading a lot of forums where surprisingly owners were complaining about the noise that the drinking water system generates when the pump turns on and is running. And I was kind of surprised. I thought, you know, maybe it was just isolated. I kind of brushed it off thinking maybe it was something specific to certain floor plans. But then I took delivery of my Jayco Pinnacle, and as soon as I started using the drinking water system, I could immediately relate to all the complaints because it was so noisy. I mean, every time I dispensed water, especially here from the main tap at the sink, I would hear this loud rattling throughout the entire coach, along with what sounded like metal on metal vibrating against itself, and it was so obnoxiously loud that it would have woken my kids or anyone else sleeping in the RV. I mean, that's how loud it was. So I began to investigate the drinking water system to figure out why it was so noisy, and here's what I found. First, I noticed that here on my Jayco, the main water pump over here is the exact same brand and model as the filtered water pump over here for the drinking water system. Now, I've had some previous rigs where the water pump was pretty noisy, but here in my Jayco Pinnacle, the main water pump actually was very quiet. I can barely hear it when I'm running water to the other fixtures, you know, whether it's a shower or the dishwasher. And so I was really puzzled, you know, why, if the main water pump is very quiet and it's the same brand and model as the filtered water pump, why is this one so much noisier? Now, let me just mention that all the video you're seeing today is after I completed the modifications to silence the drinking water pump. But the first big difference I noticed between the main water pump and the drinking water pump was that originally Jayco had used on the inlet and the outlet, they used 1/4-inch outer diameter tubing, just like you're seeing here going into the 5-gallon jug. So remember, this is 1/4-inch outer diameter tubing, which means the inner diameter is even smaller. You know, there's only so much water, so much throughput that you can get here. And this tubing is fairly rigid. There's not a lot of give and take to it. Compare that to what Jayco put on the main water pump, and you can see here it's this 1/2-inch, kind of like a vinyl braided hose, and it's 1/2-inch inner diameter, okay? So a lot more water that can go through there, plus this has a lot of flex to it, a lot of give and take to it. And so that was the first difference that I noticed. Now, the manufacturer SureFlow, they actually make what they call a pump silencing kit, and basically it's comprised of what you can see I installed here. It's two 30-inch hoses, that same 1/2-inch inner diameter. Again, it's a vinyl braided hose that has a good bit of flex and give to it, and so that's what's going on the inlet and the outlet now, so that when this pump cycles on and off, you know, and the water pressure changes a little bit and the pump is vibrating, instead of having something rigid on the inlet and the outlet for vibrations to transfer and carry over to, now it's got this softer vinyl braided hose that can kind of absorb and flex with those vibrations and changes in pressure. And so then all those vibrations are not being carried through the piping throughout the rest of the coach. So that was the first change that I made. And by the way, I will include in the description below an affiliate link if you wish to purchase that 30-inch silencer kit from SureFlow there on Amazon. It's super easy to install, definitely a DIY project, and you're looking at a close-up here of where it transitions from the 1/2-inch inner diameter hose that's part of the silencing kit. Then you just reuse the same adapters that were on there originally, where it transitions here to the original 1/4-inch outer diameter tubing. So this made a big difference in my opinion. Definitely would recommend doing doing this first. Second thing I did was add a rubber isolation pad between the pumps and the subfloor. And I'll just point out that these SureFlow pumps actually have isolators built into their feet already. You can see this softer black material down here. It's designed so that when these pumps are vibrating, this softer black material kind of absorbs that and doesn't let all the vibrations transfer down into the subfloor where they're mounted. But I figured it couldn't hurt to have another isolator pad underneath them. And so this is actually recycled 1/4-inch gym flooring. So it's from a previous project that I had some scraps left over, and I just kind of had been holding on to them probably for over a decade and finally found a use for them. So I cut a scrap here to go under both of the pads. Now you certainly could go thicker than this. I mean, it's only about 1/4 inch thick. I mean, they make isolator pads that are much thicker with cork and other materials. In fact, I see a lot of them on HVAC equipment in houses to keep those vibrations from compressors and motors, you know, from transferring to the living space. But this is just what I had laying around, so I used it, but you certainly could go a lot thicker. But I think having more isolation between the pumps and the subfloor helps those vibrations not transfer and kind of reverberate throughout the coach. The next change I made was to cover the majority of the remainder of this 1/4 inch tubing with this foam pipe insulation. So remember, this 1/4 inch tubing is what Jayco plumbed between the gallon jug and the inlet of the pump, and then the outlet of the pump to the fixture in the kitchen. And my thinking was this 1/4 inch tubing is fairly rigid and capable of carrying a lot of vibrations all the way to that dispenser. So by putting this foam pipe insulation around it, we cut down the chances of all those vibrations kind of reverberating throughout the coach. So you're looking at a close-up of the inlet side here, but this just basically goes up into the ceiling and then comes down into the 5-gallon jug. And it's the same story over here on the outlet side of the pump. You can see it goes into that silencer hose, and then right about there it transitions to the 1/4 inch tubing. So you can see there, I just took that foam pipe insulation and fed it onto the 1/4 inch tubing, and then this goes down into the underbelly of the coach. And so I just carefully kind of threaded it on and pushed on that foam pipe insulation. You know, I think it comes in 6 or 8 foot sections. And so you just kind of gently keep pushing that pipe insulation along the path of the 1/4 inch tubing until you can't anymore. And I think it took me maybe about 10 feet worth or so of that insulation to get it as far as I could down there into the underbelly. And that seemed to make a big difference in cutting down the vibrations carrying through that 1/4 inch tubing. All right, the next change made a huge difference, at least in my floor plan here, and it has to do with the sound that I would describe almost like 2 cymbals vibrating and rubbing up against one another every time the pump cycled on. And I discovered what it was is this transfer switch box here. This is a metal enclosure with a metal lid, and it's enclosing the transfer switch. And you can see it's only about a foot away from both of the water pumps. So every time they would cycle on, this metal lid, which it does have a little set screw here keeping it on, but this metal lid had a lot of play, and so it would vibrate violently and shake on top of this metal enclosure, almost again like 2 cymbals vibrating against one another. So that was a pretty easy problem to fix. I just took some adhesive felt and lined the entire inside of the lid there so that as it sat and rested down on the enclosure box here, there's no more opportunity for it to wiggle and move, and the felt kind of absorbs all that. So double check if you have a transfer switch. It's possible that you might be hearing that same vibration sound coming from this lid, and you just have to isolate it with felt so that it doesn't have room to vibrate anymore. And then kind of along that same wavelength, I just looked here in the basement storage for other PEX pipes that could be potentially vibrating and rubbing up against one another. And so you can see I just selectively took that same foam pipe insulation and put it in key points where I thought there might be some vibrations. And then I also secured them. You know, a lot of these PEX pipes, the manufacturers kind of leaves them kind of flopping around and loose so they can hit other sewer pipes. And so I would secure them at different key points along with that foam insulation, and that seemed to make a big difference too. Now, as I was making all these changes, I also consulted with the manufacturer SureFlow, and you know, I think they're pretty decent as far as their reputation goes in the RV industry. But I was actually really surprised at how quickly I got put in touch with an engineer, and I just submitted a generic support request on the website. So I explained to the engineer the symptoms I was encountering, such as how the drinking water pump was so much louder compared to the main water pump, and then also how Jayco had used the 1/4 inch tubing, you know, on the inlet and the outlet of the drinking water pump. And I don't know if I did the best job explaining everything because this is all over an email, but the engineer at SureFlow in the end, he suggested increasing the water pressure here on the drinking water pump itself. So I did try that as well, which is a little tricky, as you not only have to adjust the pressure switch, but you also have to adjust the bypass pressure switch. And it can be tricky getting them both synced up so that the pump cycles properly. So again, I did end up increasing the pressure ever so slightly here on the filtered water pump, but I don't really think it made much of a difference on the noise side. So I don't know that I would recommend doing that unless you feel really confident about adjusting them both. So do that at your own risk. Really, I think the other things that I've already mentioned made a lot bigger difference as a combination overall. So let me show you what the end result sounds like. And I wish I had recorded a before video before all the modifications were made so that you could hear the difference between the two back to back. So you're just gonna have to trust me on that. I'm telling you, it was obnoxiously loud every time I turned on that filtered water pump, how it would reverberate throughout the coach. I mean, it is a night and day difference now. But let's head on to the coach. We'll turn on the water pump and then open up a fixture so you can hear it. On my floor plan, I've got a small 12-volt switch over here for the drinking water pump, and it is backlit so that you know when it's on. I would imagine that Jayco probably uses this same switch in most of their units. But when you turn it on, you're not going to hear the pump right away unless one of your fixtures is open here, the main one or the ice line, or unless you've got maybe some air in the lines or your pressure is dropped. But as soon as you open the fixture, then the pump will cycle on. And I'm not sure if you can hear all that in the video, but it's pretty quiet, especially compared to where it was. In fact, let me try moving the camera to a few other locations and get the pump to turn on so you can kind of hear it better. First, I'll do the bunk room here, and really the pump is just on the other side of this wall, only separated really by the water heater. So this is what it sounds like in the bunk room. Now I'll let you hear what it sounds like in the bathroom up here on the upper level, which is pretty much directly over the pump. It's just below the floor deck here. And as you can hear, it's pretty quiet still. Now, how about I give you a listen right next to the pump here in the basement storage. Now, of course, it's going to be a lot louder when you're right up next to it, but it'll give you an idea of what it sounds like after all the modifications have been made. Well, hopefully that gives you an idea of what it sounds like at a few different points inside and outside the RV after the modifications were made. And I know it can be hard to convey that and demonstrate that over a video, but for me in person, it's drastically different. I mean, you definitely still hear the pump. It's not invisible, but it is significantly quieter compared to how it was before. But you know, in making all these modifications, it got me thinking about what could potentially be the root cause of why the drinking water pump is seemingly so much louder than the main water pump, since they're the same brand and model. And this is just a theory, but I'll throw it out there. I wonder if it has something to do with the 1/4-inch outer diameter tubing that Jayco uses to plumb the entire system. You know, I wonder if it's too restrictive to the point where the pump can't push the amount of water it wants to through that 1/4-inch line, and so there's some kind of back pressure maybe developing, or the pump is struggling to push the amount of water through that 1/4-inch line. So again, this is just a theory, but I wonder if Jayco were to replace the 1/4-inch outer diameter tubing and plumb the entire system, at least on the output side, with 1/2-inch tubing, just like the rest of the coach is plumbed with. I wonder if that would then, just by itself, make the system a lot quieter. Maybe the pump wouldn't have to struggle to put the amount of water through. And that, by the way, is just a theory. And for those curious, on my floor plan, I do have the refrigerator you saw with the ice line, and they actually do plumb the ice line in that 1/2-inch braided vinyl tubing because it's on a slide, right? And they have to have something flexible so when the slide opens and closes, that water line can flex and move. So they actually did transition at some point in my floor plan from that 1/4-inch tubing to the 1/2-inch to go out to the ice line on the slide. But I just wonder if they did the whole system in 1/2-inch, if that by itself would make the system a lot quieter. I think of it almost like if you're trying to sip through one of those tiny little coffee stirrer straws where it's really tiny and you're just trying to sip and you really can't get much water, compared to a giant straw where you feel like you're drinking out of a fire hydrant. So I wonder if some kind of dynamic like that is playing a role here with the drinking water system. Well, let me just offer some final thoughts here. And by the way, if you're watching this and you have a Jayco with the same drinking water system, I would imagine many of you have done modifications to quiet the system down. And I would love to hear about those in the comments below. I mean, maybe we can all learn off of each other and at least give Jayco some ideas for future improvement. But before I close out the video, let me just point out how nicely the 5-gallon jug integrates with a full sliding tray here in the basement storage. And what I love about this is when it's time to refill the 5-gallon jug, you're not having to reach into your basement storage and strain your back. When it's on a pull-out tray like this, it's just right at waist level, super convenient. And to do this, you just have to make sure that you've got enough slack in your tubing here so that when the tray goes in and out, because remember it goes out this direction but out the other side as well, just so that the tube is not getting restricted or pulled on anything. And then another tip I learned is if you put a Ziploc bag, tape it to the side of the jug, then you've got a nice sanitary and safe way to store that cap, because remember this is drinking water, so you want to make sure when you're changing it and refilling it, you know, nothing potentially is getting in there, any kind of contaminants. And last thing I'll mention, this is kind of a wish list thing, a future idea, but I've often thought about what if you're camping somewhere and you'd rather not use the 5-gallon jug for your drinking water. I mean, what if you want to use the municipal water source for drinking and what feeds your ice line and such? So it'd be kind of neat if there was a built-in 3-way diverter valve here in the wet bay where you could easily switch between the 5-gallon jug or the city water as your source for drinking water. And it'd not only have to switch between sources, but it would also have to keep water from going back into the 5-gallon jug or back into the city water line. So it'd be neat to have a single diverter valve here in the wet bay as opposed to, you know, 2 separate ball valves in series that would accomplish the same purpose. So hopefully I'm making sense there, but just a future idea to throw out there. All right, well, I hope this video has been helpful to tame the noise on your drinking water system. But as I mentioned before, if you've got a Jayco RV with the same system, I'd love to hear what you've done to silence it. Maybe we can all learn from each other, so definitely let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching.